Hello and welcome back. Thank you for checking in. I'm so glad you're here. This is Jan's Stampin'Cafe. Sorry I haven't had many videos recently. A treasured family member has passed away and I've had health issues. Slimline cards are very popular in the card making world. I've jumped in with both feet. Today's video is another look at the Celebrate Sunflower stamp set from Stampin' Up, but you could easily duplicate this technique with your stamps. I'll show you how to save time aligning dies and stamps, a method to add ink blending to intricate dies, a Trifold Slimline card, and tips for using background stamps on Slimline cards. I will link to supplies used in the description box below. I really want to use the buffalo check background with the large sunflower. Both images remind me of harvest season. I want to show off the detail of the sunflower using the die cuts and stamp. I will need to add several colors in different ways to achieve this. First, I cut the intricate flower petals. I want to add depth to the center by using ink blending. Have you ever tried this? Hard as you try, the paper tears before you get it shaded. Well, here's the solution. This tip is passed on from Katia K. Ink the paper before you die cut it. Katia suggested cutting the paper in appropriate sizes for the die cuts first. I just laid my die on the paper and estimated the size of the area I wanted to color. You see, I was only after the center of the flower, so I applied ink in a small circle, making the center the darkest area. When I lay the die on the colored areas, you can tell that the shading will be the perfect size. The very center, open area will be the knob or crown of the flower and will be a piece of soft suede cardstock on a dimensional added at the end. I trimmed my cardstock to a piece that would fit the die cutting platform and then cut the die. Then I chose a very light yellow cardstock. It's called So Saffron for the flower base because I planned the stamp image to be a slightly darker yellow called Crushed Curry. I was trying to make the flower as natural looking as possible, so stamping in brown or black would be too much contrast. Before stamping and die cutting the flower base, I repeated the ink blending technique using a soft application of crushed curry. I applied the ink in a little bit larger circle so the center of the petals would be brighter than the tips, and then added a small circle of soft suede to give the appearance that the petals are receding. It makes a smooth transition to the coloring of the petal detail. I checked the size of the ink blending with the dies. Before I use a flower set like this, I like to align the die with the stamp and mark it so I don't have to hunt for the alignment every time I use the set. I look for a unique area of the image, which in this case is 3 petal points that look brushed to the side. I match the die with the stamp and make Sharpie marks on the stamp and die at the petals. The next time I use this set, I only have to look for the Sharpie marks rather than spin the die round and round looking for the match. Now I will stamp the flower on the ink blended cardstock using the Stamparatus. I position the stamp with the 3 petals at the top. I ink and stamp and look at the additional detail that ink blending gives the flower. I repeated this for the remaining flowers, and off camera I cut the flower base with the outline die. The detail petal die cuts are cut from Mango Melody cardstock with soft suede inking in the center. It's important to note that when you glue intricate dies, tiny drops of glue spaced out are all you need. It is not necessary to have a solid line of glue on every tiny piece of paper. That much glue will lead to a hot mess of glue squishing out all over. Now I can easily align the pieces by finding those 3 reference petals. I repeat this for all of the flowers and add the centers using dimensionals. Slimline cards can vary in size. I made this card body 8 3/4 inches by 7 3/4 inches. In the future, I think I will keep the Slimline card body size to 8 1/2 by 7 1/2 because it'll fit my envelope template better. Here's a tip for folding your card perfectly straight. After you have cut and scored the card, lay the card against the top edge of the trimmer, making sure that the bump of the fold is facing up and is parallel to the top of the trimmer. Keeping the card against the trimmer ridge, bring the bottom edge up to meet it and hold it firmly against the trimmer ridge. Making sure the sides are even and straight, press the bone folder along the score line and burnish the fold. Now I'll stamp the buffalo check background on a piece that is slightly larger than the card. You'll see why I left it too big in a moment. I'm using the Stamparatus so I can re-ink and re-stamp. I stamped the image 3 times to get the full ink coverage I wanted. You can see that my paper is hanging off the bottom of the Stamparatus as well. The stamp measures just under 5 inches, so there's just no way to cover an 8 1/2 inch paper in one shot. You'll see me turn the paper around and then hesitate because I'm trying to match the pattern of the image. This is the seamstress in me. After a bit, I decided it wasn't going to work and I just have to cut the piece apart, glue it back together, and place the flowers to disguise the cut, and no one would ever know. Well, at first it looks like I was successful, but then you see the mismatch. So I cut it apart and pieced it with tear and tape, and then trimmed it to fit the card front to my liking. I suggest you start with an oversized piece of cardstock and trim it to fit your Slimline card later when you use these large background stamps. The buffalo check stamp is less forgiving than most stamps because of the straight line design. But due to the small repeat size of the pattern, you can match the pattern pretty much anywhere, and that should work with your design. Off camera, I die cut leaves from velveteen paper and colored them by smooshing it in garden green ink. Now I have all of the pieces I need to build the card. I adhered the check piece with Stampin' Seal Plus and took advantage of the double-sided tape where it is pieced. I arranged the flowers and leaves where I like them, making sure to cover the place where the buffalo check was trimmed to fit. I used Tombow glue to adhere the flowers to the card. The only dimensionals or foam adhesive used was at the very center of the flowers. Initially, I thought I only wanted 3 large flowers to hang off the edges, but when I saw how much of the flowers was going to be trimmed off, I decided to add those pieces to fill the card front. This last-minute addition really added fullness to the bouquet of the sunflowers. I love the bright yellow with black. The farmhouse feel of the check and sunflowers and the large flowers make a statement. It's also great that I can turn the card to either orientation, vertical or horizontal, when I decide who to send it to. My next example of Slimline cards is a Trifold card. I want the front panel to have a unique cut and not be the full height of the card. So my plan is to use a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panel that I will add to the side of the card with a folded edge that'll be concealed. I started by stamping the large sunflower in the lower corner of the panel. Notice I am keeping track of the flower petals that are marked on the stamp and die for reference. Then I masked and stamped it 2 more times, each time noting the reference petals. I will look for these petals when I die cut the flowers. Next, I ink blend the flowers as I did on the previous card. Then scored and folded the panel 1/2 inch from the edge. To get the die cut edge, I needed to partially die cut each of the flowers. You will see me set up each of the 3 cuts. Partial die cutting is another way to use your dies creatively to get a different look. I'm using the Big Shot machine with the all-purpose platform and standard cutting pads. The sandwich is platform with all tabs closed, the cutting pad, paper, die, and cutting pad. I only want to cut the outer edge of the flowers. I align the die with the first flower. The top cutting pad will create the pressure needed to cut. The die will only cut where both cutting pads are stacked. But watch, when I added the top cutting pad, I only placed it over the area of the flower that I wanted to cut. And note, the very end of the cutting pad is beveled, so when I lay it down, it looks like it'll cut further into the other flower than it really does. You can also note that the cutting pad isn't laying completely straight with the bottom pad. I had to do this because of the location of the start and stop points on my cuts. Once it rolls past the die, the top plate becomes loose enough for me to move it a little. And remember, I'm only cutting part way around each flower, so I must get a little creative positioning the paper and die. The corner of the paper that's off the platform will get crunched, but it was planned to be cut off in the end anyway. So I repeat this for the last flower. Then I give a little snip where the cuts didn't match up perfectly. Off camera, I prepared the intricate petal die cuts the same as I did for the first card by adding shading with my ink blending tool. Then I glued the die cuts to the panel, trimming where necessary to fit the layered images. I have fallen in love with the camouflage background stamp from Stampin' Up. The first time I saw it, I passed it by thinking it would just be for the guy cards. Then I started seeing what Elizabeth Price was making with it. I never thought of using it for water or simply to add texture anyplace. I'm using it here in lieu of adding die-cut leaves because I couldn't decide how to place my leaves. I wanted the flower panel to be one piece with nothing else showing inside. I think this stamp adds the idea of leaves without the fuss. Again, I used the Stamparatus and stamped twice. I masked the folded edge of the card, then turned the cardstock and stamped the remaining portion of the front. Due to the design on the stamp, no matching is really needed. There's no overlap of the images because I used Post-it tape. The line where the 2 stamped images meets will be covered by a sentiment strip. I added Tombow glue to the flap of the flower panel and adhered it to the inside back of the card, taking care to be sure it's straight and slightly, oh so very slightly, over the edge for ease as the layers of paper will become thicker. Then I added a piece of beautiful Ornate Garden Designer Series paper to the inside back. The piece is cut to cover the inside of the card completely in order to hide that flap of the sunflower panel. Now be sure to place the paper at the fold, not over the fold of the panel, so the card will close flat. I finished the inside of the card with a blank Whisper White stitched frame die cut for my personal note. I added a layered sentiment strip to give the impression that the camouflage stamping is one image. It will hide under the beautiful sunflowers until the recipient opens the card. Lastly, I adhered the knob of the sunflowers. These circles are part of the sunflower die set, and I cut them from soft suede cardstock and adhered them with dimensional adhesive. The dimension and the dark color give the flowers an even more realistic appearance. I am really pleased with these slimline cards. I love how the detail of the large flowers turned out. I think they look as realistic as possible. The trifold flowers add a little layer of surprise too, and the stamp backgrounds look like one continuous image. You can see that any dies and stamps can be used on slimline cards. It's not necessary to purchase specially designed tools to create these long cards. Thanks for sharing your time with me. Please click on my face to subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up if you like this video. This is how I'm encouraged to create more videos. Please use the comments below to tell me what you would like to see in an upcoming video. Have a great week, and I'll be back soon.